Hey friends, hello, what's happening? It's me, Tumo Valkonen from Tumo Valkonen Coaching, coming to you live today with Kira Day. Here we are going to be discussing about passion, and I'm really passionate about this discussion. I'm really excited to have you, Kira, in my show. So how are you doing? What's happening in your world today?
Oh, thank you so much, Tomo. And I know we've been chatting on and off for about a year now. This is the first time we're actually speaking live. So I'm excited to be here. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation because this is my passion. So thank you.
That's it. That's it. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I'm actually writing a book right now in a process, and there's one of the chapters will be more than likely, it's still in the works, but we'll be touching about passion for sure, and passion drivers and how that relates to performance and lifestyle and so on and so forth, which is something that we're probably going to get to, I'm sure, in the second half part of the conversation. But let's start from somewhere. Um, Actually, let's start from here because I'm seeing the bookshelf behind you, and I'm so intrigued.
Yeah.
What's back there? There's a whole bunch of different colors and books and so on and so forth. What are
Um,
you reading What are you reading at the moment?
so all of these have already been read. What you don't see is the mess of books in front of me and beside me. I keep that out of view. But the books that I'm reading right now, actually, I'm going back to some of my spiritual roots. I'm looking more into the magic of Reiki. There's Time for the Soul and Somatic Psychotherapy today. Those are the three books that I'm currently digesting.
Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. That's super cool. So let's actually little follow up from there. Follow up from that is that the spiritual journey or the spirit or energy, whatever people want to call it, is that been always with you, or is it more like it comes, comes and goes, or is it something that you're diving deeper into it in your like current current self?
Think the spiritual side I don't talk about too much. So thank you
Mm.
for opening it up with that. There's very few questions I get asked around that subject, but I think it's been with me my whole life. I've had a lot of very interesting experiences when I was younger that have challenged my worldview, and it got me very curious about what else is out there. How can we begin to even understand it? I grew up with a fairly religious parents who didn't love my spiritual meanderings, but I don't know. I've just always been very curious about energy and connection and what it all means. It's the mysteries that can consume my mind at times. So,
Mm. Interesting, interesting. Because I had a pretty much of a deep dive into sort of spiritual life, if you will. Back in my days, I was in this sort of festival communities and so on and so forth. And there was a kind of my like brother from the other mother, if you will. He kind of took me under his wing and showed me what that world is like. So I've been exposed to that a little bit as well, for sure.
I love.
Um, yeah, but just going from there. So you mentioned a little bit about your background, for the people that, especially sort of my community, that possibly been living under the rock and never heard of you. So let's tell a little bit of your story, and maybe we could start off by who was who was Kira Day at 16. What were you doing? Where were you based at? What were your sort of thought processes and circles and so on and so forth?
I feel like here at 16 has been locked out of my memory.
Wow.
I had a lot of adversity growing up, and my teenage years were just a mixture of me trying to understand life, me trying to understand myself, where I wanted to be. I think that's the age group too, where you're trying to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life, which is completely messed up because you don't even know yourself at that point in time. And there was a lot of pressure within my family home and things like that. 2 years later, from 16, I would have ended up in a very abusive relationship and gone through some substance abuse problems and different things like that in that nature as well. And another thing I don't talk about. So thank you to Amo for opening up the page for all the things. But yes, it was a very, I would say, dark part of my journey.
Hmm.
And probably the number one thing that broke me to rebuild me. So a lot of I would say who I am today, what I do today, how much I care today can be attributed really to those times. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, that was me back then. Like,
Wow, that's
oh,
an interesting one because I mean, 16 or 16 to 18, that's very early.
yeah,
That's very early days, and as you mentioned, I was blessed to have a very safe and secure environment, a whole bunch of good friends, and but for me, that type of growth, if you will, I mean, we all go through some kind of growth in some point of our lives, I suppose, especially that inner growth, but happened more sort of mid 20s and so on and so forth when I sort of got exposed to real world, if you will.
mhm.
Um, so what was it like after that? Sort of after 18, did you still you kept growing and having that internal inquiries and sort of deep reflective thoughts, and were
Yeah.
there friends helping you or maybe mentors, or what were the sort of helping hands, if you will, during that journey?
I think back in the day, I had one helping hand who was my father.
Mm,
I think he was the person that, you know, um, was meant to be in my life at that time. I don't know what I would do or where I would be if it wasn't for a lot of his guidance
mhm.
and his constant unconditional love for me and my messiness.
Beautiful.
But, I think at that time, it was a very lonely period for me. A lot of the people that I was around and associated with um, didn't were in their own pain and
Mm,
weren't able to see past their pain to understand mine or understand what to do with mine. So that part of my life was, again, it was a pretty dark stage. That being said, um, I think I doubled down on trying to understand more of the spiritual parts of my nature back then because it was a really good anchor for me and in some ways an escape as well. But all of that to say, I think it was around the age of 23, 24 where things really started to turn around. And it was within that age category that I started to redefine myself. I started to see myself not as a product of my environment, but as a person who can create her own environment. And
mm,
so that was my breakthrough years where I really started to think about, well, what do I want out of this? Right? Is this the kind of life I want for myself? No.
mhm,
Can I depend on other people to create my life for me? Absolutely not. So if I can't do any of those things, then who am I and who do I need to be and how do I need to show up in order to create the kind of life that I want and to correct the things that have happened? So I found a lot of my own inner strength around that time period, and I doubled down in the corporate world.
mhm.
That was the place where I found safety. That was the place where I found control of my destiny. That was the place that I, yeah, I just kind of went full throttle in my career and trying to understand what I wanted for myself. But I was starting from ground zero. So passion wasn't even a part of the conversation back then.
Yeah.
It was more about necessity and getting my shit together and creating a financial foundation for myself,
Mhm,
supporting my family. Like um, a lot of those types of, I think, priorities were
mhm.
in center for me at that time in my life.
Love it. Love it. Just the last one from that sort of one, like when you were in that sort of turnaround section when the things were like, oh, okay, we're going down, and it's like, okay, there's the dip, and
Yep.
then on that sort of that uphill, the start of the uphill, if you will, if you can imagine that, obviously, you mentioned your father. Were there other mentors, books?
Yeah.
Like, what were the elements, if you will, that helped you to start to climb back up, if you will, or getting to the clarity, if you will?
So truthfully, I I think a lot of the inspirational things and digging deeply into authors and different books came at around 26, 27 for me.
Hmm.
23 to 25 literally was like, what am I doing with my life? I was in shock. I was
Hmm.
going through a lot of like, post-traumatic stress stuff, and that, and all of these words I had no idea of. I didn't even have the vocabulary for it at the time. So I would say between 25 to 27 was when I started to get really curious. That's when I started to pick up an addiction of reading, because I didn't have access, truthfully, to, I think, people or resources at the time. I found it in authors. I found it in the likes of Jack Canfield. I found it, in the likes of Tony Robbins. Like, those were really kind of some influential figures to me in that time period. But then I also got really fascinated about other things. My brain was a sponge, and all I wanted to do was learn. Learning was my escapism, and it mentally preoccupied me and helped me to, I don't know, like reading became almost like a best friend on my journey. And it was my sanctuary to improve myself, to find new ways of thinking about things, to find new ways of dealing with whatever it was I was going through. It was my outlet. So yeah, Stephen Hawking, like, they were just like, I had such a range for wanting to take in information.
Yeah,
I was just absorbed by it.
Yeah, for sure. It's the word that stuck out for me from there was the word curiosity. And I definitely want to come back to that, because I think there's a lot that can be said about that, and how that is obviously linked to passion. It's obviously been linked to flow when it comes to flow states that I'm very passionate about, and so on and so forth. But I want to come back to that curiosity and that sort of, need, or either hunger for learning and growth. That's I think part of the puzzle for sure. But just really quickly before we move on, I wanted to give a shout out to people that are watching us, especially here in LinkedIn. Please leave us some comments. I see there's Hal and Patrick already left us some comments. I think Patrick mentioned there that readers are leaders. That's absolutely true. So please feel free to leave us comments. We are trying to answer, especially the good one, the juiciest ones, towards the end of the conversation. I want to keep the conversation flowing and going, that we get to this quote unquote the flow state, and which I love about. So definitely we are going to answer the questions towards the end. So hang out until the end with us. We'd love to have you here. But so let's get into this whole idea of passion, and maybe you can sort of open up. How did your journey then lead to being curious and passionate about passion? Like, what was that like? How did that happen?
So that actually matured over a kind of 2-decade time period, right? So when I started to dive into the corporate world and the understanding, I left a lot of what I would call my passions behind. I became very single focused on learning the craft, becoming successful. That was my main driver and motivation for a while. Now, that served me right up until I started to scale, I guess, well into my 30s. And then I started to realize the sinking feeling that whatever I was doing wasn't really my calling. It wasn't really what I was here to do. And I actively ignored that for a good decade. I actively ignored it. I did not want to look at it. I did not want to change the course I was on. I was very stubborn. And that, I paid the price in the end for that. And it's a price I will pay over and over and over again, because there was so much learning and so much growth that happened from that whole time period of my life. And I'm grateful for every single step that I had taken, because, again, for me, learning is everything. And if you're not learning, if you're not growing, then you're not living. And so when I want to say I was about 28, late 20s, my body broke for the first time. It had a huge list of symptoms that were showing up, that were confusing doctors, was confusing me. And it was the first time that I was just like, wait a second, this body thing doesn't just last and work forever. I'm like, why? How does that happen? I'm young. Like, what's going on here? And I found it to be really annoying at first. I was just like, I got shit to do. I don't have time to be worrying about these things, you know? And as horrible as that sound, that was my attitude at the time. It was my mindset. And I don't think I had a connection to my body. I didn't have, conversation with it. I was very disassociative. Again, a lot of trauma responses that I didn't even know were trauma responses, right? Overwork is a trauma response. And, diving into these obsessions and addictions, they're all trauma responses. And it's designed to take you away from the things that pain you or hurt you. And so lo and behold, got back into work, got better, found some answers. Life was great. Scaled my career quite aggressively at that time period. So by the time I was in my mid 30s, I just gotten married and life was looking up. I just bought my first place. I just got married. Like everything was great. And then bam, body breaks again. Only this time it's scarier than the first time. And it caused a lot of anxiety. It caused a lot of just what was going on. But I think it was the tension I needed to just put the brakes on what I was doing. And at that point in my career, I was on an up climb. So I just landed the largest deal in the company's history. It was a very high profile deal. It would have helped me out astronomically had I stayed for years to come. And I was very anchored and attached to my identity in that time period, what I was doing. And what we do form identities around, right? And a lot of attachments. And I had to break every single thing down when I got sick the second time because there was no way I could have anchored in or kept going where I was going. My body was telling me so much in so many different ways prior to that you need to go in another direction. And I was just not listening actively, like I said.
Right. Yeah.
So I took my type A personality and I'm like, okay, fine, we're going to figure this out. And that's when I started to look at different modalities. I turned away from Western medicine and I started looking at more Eastern types of modalities. I started to get back into my spirituality. I started to try to understand what was causing the disconnect, the misalignment, and it was just a really cool spiritual inner journey that I went through where passion was the thing that came out on the other end of that. And then I got really, curious about these systems that held my system in place for so long, but ultimately was the thing that made it big. And yeah, that's kind of the path that led me back to me, I would say. And in doing so led me back to my passion.
Wow. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
that's a good story, empowering story for many people to listen. And I've spoken about that I guess a lot of people can put a word on it, which is the burnout. I'm not sure if that's the word you use, but a lot of people use that word. Yeah. And on a hindsight, for me personally, I'm very much of a high achiever and pushing the pedal to the metal a lot of the times. But I think what helps me a lot is possibly, and I've spoken about this in various other rooms and places and spaces, that is the sort of sports background that I was exposed to. And for some reason, for me personally, and I know it's absurd for people that haven't possibly pushed their body like physically that much in a way. But when you get to those sort of physical edges of your body without the mind, if you will, because the sports are a lot of the times, lack of a better word, not like slightly mindless, but you're pushing just bodily a lot. It helps you understand how your body works. And okay, these are the edges. Okay, these are the boundaries where I'm operating. So how can I regulate? And I almost have like that automatic switch nowadays. If I'm pushing myself too much, either mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically, it's almost like my body says like, oh, okay, let's just calm down and let's get some sleep and let's just relax and take a day off or half a day off or what have you.
That's amazing. And I think that was the thing I was missing. I was pushing my mind. I was pushing it past its its extremes. And I was pushing myself. I was one of those people that would be like writing an email at 4 a.m. and then up at 7:30 or 8 for a meeting. And it was just crazy. I was crazy. And I look back on that now and I'm just like, who was that person? You know, I didn't have those boundaries or those parameters like you did. However, I think the healing journey that I went on was a journey back to me. Like now I am a lot more sensitive to my body's requests of me. I don't fight sleep anymore. I make sure, you know, I'm balancing the needs that everybody just needs in order to sustain life and to do it in a way that's healthy. And I think that's why one of the reasons that I'm really passionate about helping people to understand what healthy passion is, because it is this constant dance that we're doing, one part with our bodies, one part with our minds, one part with life. And those units need to be functioning in cohesion in order for things to stay harmonious and be in flow. If any one of those things are broken, then everything else crumbles. So, and these are things we're not taught, you know, and they seem to be things that are, you know, I don't know, common sense, but is it really, you know, it's like some of these things, they're just not intuitive because we flow to the rhythm that we know. And if the rhythm that we know is chaotic or traumatic, then our body's nervous systems are going to stay to that temperature. And it just doesn't matter what you try to do mentally. It's programmed to be there unless you consciously begin to understand it and reprogram yourself. So I'm encouraged by today, though, because a lot of these conversations are happening more and more. You know, there's trauma-informed leadership. There's a whole bunch of new waves of conversations where people are having these conversations more and more. So we're becoming more aware. And I think that's where we need to be going.
Yeah, I love that. And I think something that you mentioned there, you know, I wanted to pick that. You mentioned like some parts might be broken, if you will, but I would, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least how I see it, like sometimes we think something is broken, but it might just be misaligned, like that alignment, if you will. I mean, for sure, we have parts of us that might be broken, but at least in my case, a lot of the times it was actually misalignment. I don't feel myself that I was possibly broken as such, but it was just my mind is pushing me this way and my emotions are pushing me that way and my body wants to go that way. And it's like, it's just different directions, if you will.
Yeah, I think you're right. But if you stay misaligned for a very long time, things do break.
Exactly.
That is a real thing.
Absolutely.
And so while I understand and I am cautious as well, like I don't ever want to disempower people and think like I don't think we as people are broken. But I think there are certain parts of us that if we don't pay attention to them and if they're not in the forefront of our mind, you know, things break. Like a car, right? If you're driving with your car being misaligned for a while, you can expect something will go. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, I love that metaphor, and that's what a lot of people then don't, you know, using that car metaphor, if you will. A lot of people don't recognize those alarms and those signs and red lights. They're like, oh, what is that red light on the dash? I don't mind. Let's just keep going, and all of a sudden,
something happens, and you're like, wait, what? That was me. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that you mentioned about having these conversations and healthy conversations, I really wanted to acknowledge people that are in the chat there. I see there's a Hal and Kim and Patrick. They're like where we are in live right now. We're providing a space for people to connect and interact, and I think this is exactly what's happening right here, right now. So I love it. Thanks for everyone for that. But let's dive deeper into this whole idea of the passion. And I have this interesting question that I was journaling about this morning. What would I really like to ask from you about passion? Is so let's start from you. Like, what do you think? Why do people have such a hard time either finding it, maybe more importantly, feeling it, and then lastly, living their passion? Anything that you want to tackle from there? What are the obstacles that we are facing?
Okay, so let's first start with the whole thing of finding passion. This is a pet peeve of mine. I think many people have been quoted to say the same thing, but if we start with the wrong questions, we're almost guaranteed to end with the wrong answers. And the question of finding passion is inherently the wrong question, because passion isn't something that's extrinsic. It's not something that you can just go around finding. What you do with passion is you activate it. It's an internal feeling and response to your engagement with your environment, but it starts with you first and understanding the things that drive and activate you as a human. And I think the challenge with a lot of our education or growing up in our society, and I can only speak to the North American society because that's really the only one that I'm attuned to. But here when you move into school or you're getting educated on things, subjects, and you're being graded based on your performance of those subjects and how well you can understand and memorize and all that kind of stuff. There is very little focus on getting to understand you and your complexities and your intricacies, your talents, your strengths, your values, your motivations, what drives you as a person, what's important to you, what's favorable to you. Those things aren't necessarily addressed or looked at unless you come from really good parents and a really good social structure that enforces these ideas or asks about them. You're not going to know to do that internal investigation. So without that level of inner understanding, it's really hard for us to go out there and really activate or feel those types of emotions or those experiences, because again, everything, and you said it perfect, Wilma, everything comes from alignment. When you are aligned externally to your intrinsic drivers and the things that are meaningful to you, that is what sets you up for success and feeling great and all of the things. But we are taught from young to suppress those things, that those things don't matter, that success, it's about money, that, you got to have the things and you got to do the things. Like, it's all about the external stuff. And that's going to get you somewhere eventually, but it won't get you to the places that you think it will get you to if you're not really in tune with what's happening on the inside, with who you are as a person and how you want to express yourself and all of the inner things to the outside, and how you're going to then take that and be of value in the world. Like, those are the questions that you should be asking in order to get to the right answer. And I think what we do is we focus so much on passion because we see it in other people and we're like, yeah, I want that. I want that passion thing. And so I need to do something in order to get it. And I need to look outside in order to do that. But again, I can't stress it enough. It's not about your outside. It's about your inside. And I think once you understand what that is, you can then control the dynamics and willfully activate more and more of those feelings and generate more and more of those feelings.
So what would you say to someone, let's just, go down that road, someone who's kind of in the search, if you will, or in the path of wanting to activate, or I like the word unlock, maybe your passion, if you will, but it has a hard time to connect, has a hard time for connecting to that feeling, that sort of passion itself, if you will.
Yeah.
How or either where would one start that
journey
process, the journey?
Yeah, I get that. So oddly enough, this is a process. This is a journey. It's not something that just happens overnight. However, you can hack this, if you may. I hate that word because it totally disrespects the process. The process is necessary, right? Like, it is a discovery. And inside of that discovery, it's not this linear thing where you're like 1 + 1 = 2. It's more about understanding your internal influences or your drivers. So at the Passion Center, we have a ton of products and programs that move people in that direction in a step-by-step kind of way. And one of the first ones that we enter someone through is to understand first, what currently today is both setting you up for passion or killing your passion. That's the first thing we need to understand. Because passion isn't about one thing. It's actually about 15 things that you can break down into 4 different verticals, if you will. So simplified. So those simplifications, so that we're aware, is the internal things, like I've just discussed. So what are you great at? What interests you? What are the things that you naturally are attracted to? What are the things that you value and you find important? What are the things you went through in your past, the pain points that you've had to overcome? Those will help you to understand what is personally and uniquely meaningful to you. Because passion, at the end of the day, if you want to break it out into a simple formula, it's meaning times investment. It's doing the things you find meaningful over and investing in it, whether it's energy, time, money, whatever that case may be. That effort is what engages and stimulates the feelings of passion. So the Flow Institute, they had worked with scientists at MIT and Harvard, and what they had come to notice was that passion was driven by 2 neurochemicals. They're powerful neurochemicals that helps to drive focus in the present moment, and they are norepinephrine and dopamine. Those 2 come online when you engage in something you find meaningful. So when you engage in something you find meaningful, you're brought into the present moment. You're in full participation with the thing. And when you're in full participation with that thing, you enlist those types of chemicals that help you to feel those feel-good feelings. I call it a feel-good hangover, right? So after that, that's what it gives you. And that feel-good hangover, you want to do it again. So it'll give you the motivation to want to bond with whatever that thing is again and again and again. But it takes experimenting, and it takes learning about these aspects about who we are in order to drive what fundamentally we find meaningful. So that's kind of the first cohort. The second cohort is social. So basically, how is your environment, or how are the people that are around you supporting your ability to express those inner things? If they aren't, then that can kill your passion, right? If they are, then that can help you to enable a much more, a bigger platform to express yourself, which is where passion comes online. And then the third one is psychological. This was done by Ryan and Dacey's work in self-determination theory. And that has to do with what you could master, what you can become really good at. It has to do with autonomy, how much control you have over yourself and your destiny. And it has to do with feeling a sense of purpose, or feeling like what you're doing is valuable in some way. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, it's external. So how's your external environment setting you up for success? Are you clear? Clarity is a big one. If you're not clear, that's going to trump it. And then, are you in a position financially where it makes sense for you to explore these things? If you're burdened by the financial pressure, then you're not going to be in the right mindset to, move and flow inside of all of those things, because the financial piece of you, and this was my experience, it puts you right into survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you just cannot access the juice. So, helping yourself to regulate and get into those open, creative mindsets will allow you the ability to explore and do this discovery. But it cannot be done in a survival state. So those are really the 4 cornerstones of what helps a person in a supportive way to experience the feeling that we call passion.
Wow, that's a download and a half right there. I think we definitely have to. I need to review that and take the notes back out of it. I did pick up the first of all, the formula that came was really good. Meaning plus investment
times meaning times investment.
Meaning times, not plus. Meaning times investment equals passion. And then the last one that you just mentioned there that stuck out was that in a survival mode we cannot access the juice. I love that. Being the passion, it's so true, and it doesn't have to be a financial one. Obviously, it can be a mental pressure, relationship, what have you, whatever are those burdens. Yes. All of a sudden, it limits our access to the good stuff, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so we do heal that stuff to access that stuff.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. The what are the other? Well, let's put it this way. Um, I personally feel like when I was 16, I had a couple of friends, and I'm gonna come up to the question here. But when I was 16, I had a couple of friends that I could see that their path was laid out. Like they were 16 and they're like, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be XYZ. Like that's laid out. Like, and then lo and behold, 30 years after, that's exactly what happened. I was like, oh, like, I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah,
I literally had like, 17 different paths,
yeah,
and maybe 10 of them I was really super passionate about. I'm still like, my passion is still like quite diverse. I'm,
yes.
outdoors, athletics, personal development, like coaching. Like there's so many things that I'm like, whoa, I could do that. I could do that. And for some people, it's just like, there's just like, okay, that's it. I'm going there. I know it.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit selfish question from from here, but what would you say to someone like myself who's got like really spread out passions and very diverse stack of cards, if you will?
I
Is
would
that yeah? Go on.
I would say congratulations. You know, uh, I think we live in a period where um, we have some ideologies around the way that
Mhm.
life should work. And for those people that were able to identify what they had wanted to do from young ages, good for them. They were able to have the current environment or the current platform support um, their ability to pursue it. But we're not made to be these linear beings. We're designed to be mosaics. We're designed to have to experience life in diverse ways and to explore things in diverse ways. And the more things that you can explore and get passionate over, that's just more energy for you. And so I would say, why only 10 things? Like go for 20.
Yeah,
Have
yeah.
more on there, right? But seriously, I understand that in our capitalistic structure, we're taught that we need to have one profession, and that one profession you need to put all of your energy into, and that's going to get you to success. But that's bullshit. Like we created that prior to this day and age. We had Copernicus, who was an astronomer, a surgeon. Like there were so many different roles that a person can take on,
Yeah.
and so many different contribution and values that they can add. So how we change and why we changed, like we are people that keep evolving the system. So I always go back to well, Tracy says this a lot too, right? Like, do you? If
Mhm.
that's the way that passion wants to be channeled and flow through you, then own it and, find a way to explore more. That's
Yeah.
what I would
Yeah.
say.
I love that. Finding a way to explore even more. Yeah, that's it. That's it. One of the sort of saving graces, if you will, in my journey was, I think, years ago I read from Tim Ferriss, and he's one of these calls like generalists.
Yes,
There's
yes.
another book, I forgot the name right now, that talks about the power of generalist, and even like the army general. That's it actually comes from being a generalist. Ah. I was like, whoa! Finally, someone gets me. Like, finally, like
Yeah,
I'm getting myself into. It's like, oh, thank you. I don't actually have to
yeah.
be like super detailed in one single thing.
There's
Um,
like it's called polymaths, right?
right,
There's a
right.
woman that did a TED talk, and oh my gosh, I wish I was better with remembering names, but she talks about being a multi-passionite and
Mhm.
how it freed her when she discovered that it was okay to have multiple passions. And, I've worked with people where they'll come in to work with me thinking that they're going after this one thing. And we discover, through a series of questionings, why?
Mhm.
Why does that one thing matter so much? And as soon as they're able to, I think, crack the code in their own brain about or challenge the assumption that it should look a certain way, then they start to activate the creative and curiosity that is required to go through a real discovery process so that they can activate more of how they're meant to express. One girl in particular, I think she came in really gung-ho, like, I need to find my one thing. And now she's got these 5 things on the go that are doing amazingly well. And, she's lit up all the time when she talks about it. And it just floods my heart because I'm like, yes, be more you. Like, if you want more passion, be more you. That's how it works.
Yeah, exactly. I remember like back in my days, like when I grew up in Finland, and I mean, obviously our education system is top notch. It's very much hailed in one of the best in the world. Yet I remember, I think it was in the school or after school, like in my later days, back in Finland before I left in my early 20s. But I used to people like, why are you smiling so much? Like, why are you showing so many emotions? Like the emotional side of things was pretty kind of flatlined how I grew up. And then luckily I was able to travel to like Southern Europe and South America and live in those places and spaces. And I was like, wow, what's happening? Like people are like expressing themselves, like the internal world comes out.
Yeah.
Sometimes a bit too much, to be honest. And I was like, whoa, what's happening here? This is a completely different experience. And
Yeah.
I think now I've sort of maybe settled somewhere in the middle, if
I
you
love
will.
that. I love
Yeah.
that. So they gave you permission to be more you, whereas where you grew up kind of, had different ideas about how
Yeah.
to show up and how much emotion you should feel.
Yeah, exactly. The do you see any like a bit of a downsides of living really through the passions?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, I have a friend of mine, actually a really dear friend of mine, and he always tells me like, when I meet a new person, especially when he meets girls or women,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
says that he leaves the heart on the road. Like he can put everything out
Yeah.
at like that very second,
Yes.
and that gets him into trouble quite a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times. Like especially in this you mentioned corporate world, like there needs to be, or at least that's what they say, there needs to be some kind of guardrails and barriers of how we operate. So can you speak to that? How maybe too much passion or expressing too much passion can get us into sort of maybe unwanted situation, and maybe or anything along those lines. That what comes up to you?
So there's 2 ways that I would tackle this conversation. The first is we're always editing and modifying our behavior in social settings according to the social setting. And that's normal. But what ends up happening if we edit or modify ourselves too much is that we can lose our vibrance and ourselves in the process, right? So there is this balancing act that we all have to play with being fully expressed and at the same time being respectful of other people in our environment that may not have the same tuning as we do. And I think that's just the social intelligence part of things that we do need to climatize to regardless. That being said, I don't think that it's healthy for us to compromise our expression too much. So, and I think that's where we need to find the balance of what are the tribes that are going to support and embrace who we are and kind of move towards that. That's really important. I mean, every study on the planet, and we've got like football fields worth of study on this stuff, right? That supports and says that our human connections are the number one thing that supports our longevity, happiness, and health, and passion, So if we want to feel more like us, then we got to be around more like us. So, and when I say connection too, what I'm talking about is trust-based connections, people you feel safe with, people that won't criticize you. There's a psychological safety element that is required. So that's one of the components I'll say. Now, the second component that I will mention is that passion does have a dark side. Dr. Robert Bellerin, who's a social psychologist out of Montreal, and he's done a paper back in, I would say, 2003, and it showed that passion sat on this scale. I've modified that scale at the Passion Center, but for him, he has, and there's another Dr. Mate, Gabe Mate.
Gabriel Mate?
Yes, thank you.
I love it.
He he has another one as well, and it's about passion and addiction. Dr. Robert Bellarmine talks about harmonious passion and obsessive passion. And in all the studies that he's done, 300 plus, it's shown that when you're in the harmonious, passionate side, then your psychological health increases, your emotional health increases, all the things. But when you're in obsessive passion, it actually decreases the same amount as having no passion at all. And so the way that I understand it from my lens is that it's actually a spectrum of a scale where you've got no passion on one side. The other passion is like, full passion, all the way passionate. In the middle, you've got healthy passion. When you're obsessively passionate, it actually reduces your resiliency towards feedback, pivots, essential evolution processes, all that kind of stuff goes out the window because you're too hyper-focused on this thing. There's too much emotion behind it, which can be very paralyzing, and too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So, and usually what creates obsessive passion is usually because of some kind of unresolved trauma that we have in our system that's dysregulated our nervous system to the point that we have to overly escape in something. So there's a ton of back-end science and psychology that goes into why people become obsessively passionate. The problem is that, in the world of business and in the world of social media, a lot of people are praised and glorified for these, about having too much passion. So we have to be careful with that. To get back to a harmonious level of passion, it's about having a relationship with something without compromising all of the other things that you need to be a happy, healthy person. So, balancing your passion with your relationships and making sure that one doesn't oversee the other. Making sure that your passion doesn't come before your health, your exercise, your food, your hygiene, like all of those things. And that's where we can find our sweet spot. But it's really, again, around exercising our muscles when we feel the things that we feel and knowing what part of the scale you fall on, understanding why it's there and how you can incrementally get better and better and better at experiencing more of the good stuff without compromising other good stuff.
Love it. Love it. So much. I'm mindful of our time and really grateful for your time already. And also I wanted to acknowledge everybody's that's listening to us. And, we have about 10 minutes here. If you have any other further questions that you want to leave for Kira, right now is a great time to do that. We'll pick one or two. But I do have one more question that's kind of before that. So if you guys are listening and you have something that you wanted to raise or have a direct question, please put it in the comments right now and we'll pick it up. But what you mentioned there about the obsession, I want to, challenge you just a tiny bit on this. And this is my own experience. And then how this relates to performance and especially sort of high achievers and performers and A players, if you will, and so on and so forth. And I take an example, well, this is his words, I suppose, the late Kobe Bryant, and he always talks about obsession, like be obsessed. And I follow some other people that are very inspirational and a whole bunch of people follow them. And they are like, the way they come across is exactly what you mentioned. It's kind of beyond passion.
Right.
And they talk about this obsession.
Yes.
Right. And I see them doing like amazing things in the world and they are fully focused on this one thing. And, they may have traumas. I mean, I don't know about the internal world. I mean, but how they come across, they seem to have it, we just never know, but they seem to have it pretty well sorted out. Again, I might be completely wrong. So I would love to hear you speak a little bit more about that sort of, especially from side of performance. And I think we touched a little bit about the flow and that's sort of the sweet spot where we're going to be at, but how that sort of passion maybe relates. And do you think there's a healthy obsession? And then how those things kind of relate to our performance, if you will?
These words are really big words and they're packaged so differently by many people who experience these words, right? That's what's so That's what I'm becoming more aware of. There's always two definitions. There's the one that someone agreed that the word is going to mean, and then there's how we package the words individually. I wouldn't like Kobe. I wouldn't have pegged Kobe as being on the obsessive passion side, because he had a lot of balance in his life too, right? He was an amazing dad, and he had good partnership. Like, there was just, he was out there doing good in the world and playing. So there was a lot of different dimensions that he was able to keep in proper balance. And I think that's the important thing. The important thing is about balance, and understanding that when we're driven and when we're channeling our energy towards a certain ideal or a goal or some level of success that we want to achieve, there's always going to be some element of dedication and commitment that's behind that. Obsession is it can be a fuzzy word, because obsession and addiction have very similar qualities to each other, and they can be subtractive in terms of how we experience it. And I think there's some danger when we over-glorify something like obsession, because when you really think about it, if you're completely obsessed with something, then you're doing that thing at the cost of other things. So I think it's language, really, is what it comes down to. And I'm a big proponent, because I was the obsessive passionate type, and I was addicted to what I was doing, and that hurt me in a lot of different ways. That was my experience. I also didn't have a team like Kobe, right? And I didn't have like a whole bunch of support infrastructures around me to keep me on par and all that kind of stuff. So the resources that they have access to versus the regular person is radically different.
That's it.
So I just think it's about being mindful, choosing your words and language carefully, and making sure that it doesn't overstep the boundaries that you have to have in place to ensure a healthy, happy life. And as long as that's happening, then you're good.
Yeah.
We can use whatever words we want, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that come up to me right now, and it's super important to realize, especially this day and age that we're living in, the social media, and motivation, inspiration, passion is everywhere. At least so we think and we see. Yet, especially talking about if it was Kobe or someone else that it's doing amazing things in the world, and talking about obsession and passion, what we do not see is the level of their mental, emotional regulation abilities to keep it together. And that's a skill to me, and that is a really hyper developed skill over the years. When somebody's never practiced that sort of internal self state regulation, and you start thinking like, hey, I need to be obsessed, I need to have this passion, and driving that hard, or having that sort of quote unquote healthy obsession or healthy passion, there's a whole bunch of other things that we don't see in the background that needs to be in check. You talk about support, but it's just self-regulation, internal state management. It's super important, and if we don't have that, then we're gonna go off the rails very, very quickly.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that, and thank you for bringing that into the space, because you're absolutely right. The resources at that level, when you're playing at that level, is absolutely required in order to be able to, again, it's all self-mastery, right? And those practices and those support infrastructures to help maintain and regulate that, it goes hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. Agreed.
100%. All right, we're starting to round up. There's again, as I mentioned, I wanted to this very healthy conversation going on in the chat there, which is really cool to see. Nice. I wanted to pick one question from here, which is this one coming from Hal Eisenberg, saying, what is one thing you wish everyone could learn that they are not currently learning in terms of passion or in general?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I've given you a lot of learnings today.
That's it. I've learned a lot. So
I do think that when it comes to passion specifically, I would want people to understand, I think, or start the process of understanding that it has nothing to do with passion. Passion's the output. And if I gave you a formula earlier, passion equals meaning times investment, I would say explore what's meaningful to you, and you will get to understand what those outputs and those feelings of those outputs are. And the more we can talk about meaning, perhaps, the better conversations we can start having with ourselves, with other people, and the more able we are to move through a discovery process that's actually going to lead you somewhere good and juicy, and will get you to all of the passion that your soul can desire.
Yeah, I love that. Something that that I heard, and I think, just really quickly, your thoughts on this. What I truly feel, I think passion is something that it can also be developed, like through the skill, through the process of mastery. You become passionate about something because you've developed it over the years. And I think that's also some misnomers. People think that I should have it. It's something that everybody should feel. I think it can be developed. Would you agree?
Well, here's some really cool things about developing. If you're developing, you're spending time with something, and it's got to probably be important or at least meaningful to you if you're spending time doing it. I say the easiest way to think about this is to think about it like romantic love, right? There are some times where you can fall in love at first sight. Sometimes it doesn't happen all the time, but for other people, it takes time to develop a relationship. And inside of the developing of that relationship, you start to grow a love for that person. If both of them are right ways, neither of those are wrong ways. It's our relationship with the thing and with ourselves that is going to incur the feeling over time, depending on what drives us innately to experience the feeling, right? And then the other thing, we had a statement come up the other night in another conversation, and it was a really good one. And the person was like, well, I don't feel passionate all the time about this thing. And I'm like, well, that's cool. But guess what? I'm married. I love my husband, but I don't feel like I love him all the time. Sometimes I don't want to talk to him, right? But the love is still there. It's just, you're experiencing it through all of these different emotions, and emotions aren't static. They're always moving and always switching and always changing. And it's inside of that dynamism that we actually feel and incur more meaning in our lives that ultimately net out to having more passion. But we do need to move with the flow of our emotions and of life and of partnership. And these things evolve, they're nuanced. So, I'm so scared sometimes to speak about these things in absolutes, because our subjective experience needs to come into play in order for these conversations to really matter.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one to sort of start wrapping up. Instead of looking for passion, instead of developing or unlocking, why don't we more take a step deeper, and go for the meaning, go for the purpose, and maybe pursue mastery and see how the passion then unlocks from there, and activating it as you like to say.
And there's one other thing too, right? So I spoke a little bit about passion being about the 15 things, and and sometimes we think that it's about just one thing, and so we try to go after that one thing, but it's really the relationship and the combination of these things that facilitate our ability to experience passion. And so what you're good at and what you get to mastery, that's one of the 15 things, right? And sometimes if you just focus on what you're good at, it doesn't always yield passion, right? There's many people in my corporate career, even myself included, that was very good at what we did. We learned to master a certain skill. It didn't mean it automatically came with passion. It just meant we got good at it and we learned how to do it. Did it make it more enjoyable? Perhaps. It's better than sucking at the thing, but by no means did it enlist passion. There was a lot of other ingredients that needed to come together in order to do that. I actually have an assessment for you guys, if you're interested, that helps you to measure where you are on the passion scale. So you can see for yourself the areas that are enabling your passion versus the areas that are maybe suppressing it or killing it. And just starting from there is really good self-awareness to start building on what could I possibly do for myself to experience more of this emotion.
Love it, love it. Please drop it into the chat maybe after this. There's a whole bunch of people. There's Patrick, Kim, Hal, obviously Jürgen is over there in the chat, and maybe Kira, if you want, we'll drop in there afterwards when you have space and time to answer some of the other questions that are there in the chat. But I really want to respect your time and everybody else's time. It's been a pleasure and honor, and I'm super grateful for all the work that you do, and also this hour that I was able to spend with you. I've learned a lot for sure. I need to review a couple of things for sure. But please drop that link, as I mentioned there, and people can learn more about your work. Just lastly, about learning more from your work, where do you hang out mostly socially here? You have your website, I suppose. You have your LinkedIn, where you're super active. Are those the two main places where people can connect with you?
Yeah, we've got LinkedIn, website, definitely. Passion Center is spelled with an R-E, not an E-R. And we also do a ton of community engagement things. So we do a live every week here called Passion Break on LinkedIn. We also do a Get Curious About Passion conversation. If you have communities that you want to bring this conversation to, that's the best way to do it. And our community manager, Tracy Gorison, usually heads that up for us. And we do monthly master classes where people can just come into the experience at very low cost to them to see and experience for yourself and get deeper into your own passion drivers, let's call it.
Yeah. I love that. Kira Day, thank you so much. I feel we only touched the surface here. I had a whole bunch of other questions here. I think we may have to do a round 2 in some point.
Yes, absolutely.
And we so much about passion drivers and those like more sort of how to advise and so on and so forth. But that's actually good. Maybe people can learn more and connect with you that way. This was just a spark of curiosity and inspirational and motivational, hopefully for many. So I really want to thank you. And go and check out Kira's work. It is definitely transformational. All her posts, especially on LinkedIn, they're always a bit longer. So you always have to okay, there comes the post. Let's sit down and let's sit down for this one. So that's a good one. I love it.
Thank you, Tomo. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. And I also love learning from you as well. So this has been a great collab. And anytime you want to have a conversation, just hit me up and we can do it. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks so much. All right. Have a fantastic day.